This week's episode is a little bit different because it is an interview with me on another podcast. It's the B2B Marketers on a Mission with Christian Klepp. And in this guest appearance that I made, I talk about one of my favorite subjects, how to create a real strong value proposition. And the reason that this is one of my favorite subjects is because a value proposition sets the stage for all of the copy and all the messaging in a company's posts or in their copy. Basically, it's the foundation for everything. So Christian asked me a lot of great questions about customer research, how I do it, and how to come up with a value proposition for yourself or for your clients. And it follows five critical steps. So let's listen in.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of B2B Marketers on a Mission. This is the show where we help you to question the conventional, think differently, disrupt your industry, and take your marketing to new heights. This is your host, Christian Klepp, and today I am joined by someone on a mission to help B2B companies craft compelling, high-converting copy and emails. So coming to us from Arizona, USA, Linda Malone, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Christian.
Great to be connected, Linda. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And before we jump in, please shout out to Eric Melchor from Innovators Can Laugh for this introduction.
Yeah, I know. It's great that he connected us. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's dive in because, this is going to be quite the conversation, I think. You're quite the expert, I would say, when it comes to copywriting. That might be the understatement of the new year. But
oh, there's a lot of good copywriters, but I hold my own.
Absolutely. So, but for this conversation, let's focus on a topic that I think has become part of your professional mission, and that's how to help B2B companies find their value proposition. So, I would say let's kick off this conversation with two questions. One is, first of all, let's clear the air and define what a value proposition is. And number two, why do you think it's so important?
Value proposition, first of all, it's my favorite topic of all when it comes to B2B. And I'll tell you why later on when we get into the other questions. But it answers the question, why should I choose you? Like the value proposition really, it's not just about what you do, but it's why what you do matters to your clients. So it's like a unique promise. And I say unique because this is what really hones in on why it's important. It's your promise of value. It's a compelling reason why a business should pick you over your competitors. So that's really why it's so important. And most B2B companies can't tell you what theirs is. I know because I work with them.
Oh, wait a minute. You mean the value proposition has nothing to do with the amazing product features and the patented technology?
You know what? They can be woven in.
Yes.
And in full transparency, it's funny because getting ready for this interview, and I knew this was going to be our main discussion, I took a look at my own value proposition and I changed it, which I could tell you if you want me to reveal for the first time on this podcast.
Sure.
Well, I recently shifted my niche. Boost your fitness and health brand with expert crafted magazine quality copy. And it meets all the criteria that we're going to be talking about. So it's boost your fitness and health brand with expert crafted magazine quality copy, which really separates me from other copywriters.
So that's your current value proposition, right?
That's what I just that's what I came up with literally yesterday. Because I had otherwise been focused on SaaS companies, and so I shifted my niche.
Right. Because that's the one that I saw when I was doing I keep calling it a background check, but what I'm really doing is my homework and just researching my guests, and that's what I saw on your LinkedIn profile, right?
Yeah, I changed that already.
Okay. So, well, that's a great start. Now let's segue into the next question, which is about, and you will have no problem answering this, I'm sure, common mistakes and misconceptions. And you mentioned some of them already, but what is it pertaining to value proposition? What are some of the mistakes you've seen out there that marketers make? And most importantly, what should they do to address them?
Well, the biggest mistake, it's not really a mistake. It's sort of a lack of, it's more of I don't even know. Well, I'll tell you what it is. You can tell me if it's actually a mistake. It's just that they don't have a value proposition, or it's not niched down enough. It's too vague. A lot of these companies sound like everyone else. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is they don't want to, like, they want to stand out, but they don't want to stand out. It's always, especially if it's a big company where a lot of people have their say with what is, the messaging is. But it works against them because they're not setting themselves apart from their competitors. So that, I think, is the biggest issue that I see, and I see it all the time, like on a landing page or a homepage.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But what do you think they can do to address that? Because like that's the classic like B2B scenario, right? It's the whole like, let's play it safe. Let's not rock the boat too much, but let's try to be different anyway. So it's kind of like they're always becoming their worst enemy at some point in the journey, right?
Well, what I suggest, and this is the best way to find your real value prop, is you want to study your competition. And what you want to do is, like, when I work with a client, I will get into the social media. What are people saying about them? What are people saying about their competitors? And what are the biggest complaints? And what are their competitors not doing or not talking about? It may not even be that they're not doing something, but if they're not talking about it, that's something you want to talk about. And there's that famous story among copywriters, it's famous about, now I'm going to forget all the names associated with it, but it was a famous copywriter who was working for Schlitz beer back in, I don't know, 60s or something. And he was brought into a factory, and because his job was to find, to create this high converting copy. And he saw a process that they were doing to clean their glassware, something they were doing where it was, to him, it was astounding. Like, I didn't know that you guys did this. It was some kind of steam cleaning of, it was like a step that he was not aware of in the process. And the marketer he was talking to, said, well, all our competitors do it too. And he said, yeah, but they don't talk about it. And so he brought that out in their copy, and they ended up being like the #1 selling beer, like, after that point, because they just pulled out what it was their competitors weren't talking about. So that's how you find the best value prop.
That's a pretty good example. And I love that you brought up that bit about research. Because you kind of can't like talk about value proposition and just skip the research part, right? Especially customer research. So talk to us about what marketers and or copywriters should be looking for when they're, for example, conducting customer interviews. Like how, what kind of insights should they be extracting?
The most important thing is to ask, first of all, is to talk to customers, and past and present customers. And a lot of companies don't feel they need to do that, but you need that outside perspective. And you want to ask them, what is it that made them go with you instead of the competition? And, what was the transformation? So again, it goes back to kind of that gap that your competitors are not doing or not talking about. So, it could be something, there could be anything really. One of my clients, all of their customers, because I talked to them when I was before I did the copywriting for them, it was all about how they have this, as one person put it, otherworldly customer service, where everyone had you getting caught in that voicemail loop. Oh, click 3 if you want to speak to this department. And these people, this company, it's a big company, they have real people answering the phones, and they're not just answering the phones, but they're very helpful. And everyone was talking about the same thing. And so I use that phrase in some of their copy, otherworldly customer service, which is exactly what someone said. So it's, what is it that, made you go with them? And how did it transform you or transform the way you do your business, whatever it is that the product or service does?
Don't even get me started on this whole thing with customer service and AI. Every bank that you call here in Canada, you never actually get to talk to a person, because they just give you this whole menu and then press 1 for this and press 2 for this. And it says, what would you like to do today? and then it's AI, right? And then you tell them what you want to say, and it's like, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you please
I
repeat? It's like, oh, give me a break.
know. Yeah. And so people are starting to really, appreciate that when a company has real people answering the phone.
Yes, imagine that, right? Like
I
real
know.
people. I wanted to go back to something you said earlier, Linda, because it's something that I know some of the listeners are struggling with, and I'd like to get your take on it. Conducting customer research is important. Extracting all those insights that you talked about are important. But let's take it another step back. How do you, it's not so much buy-in, but how do you get customers to agree to this type of interview? Because we've all seen this before, where you try to interview customers and there's pushback because of, oh, sales are guarding their customers, and they're not very comfortable with marketing, talking to the customers directly, et cetera, et cetera. And that impacts the work of people like you, right?
Yeah.
So,
It's not always easy.
yeah.
I mean, I tell my clients to strive for contacting as many people as they can, 15 or 20. And if I get 5 or 7 interviews, that's usually enough. And side note, it's enough when people start saying the same thing, like everyone starts repeating something. So what I do is I have a letter that I write for them, and it talks about how, and it's coming from my client. So it's like, and it's people who are usually happy with their service. You're not going to talk to somebody who's not. So, hey, this is going to really help it's going to help our marketing. Could you please talk to Linda and I say 15 minutes. Now I know that a lot of research, people that I know, other copywriters say I allow an hour. You tell somebody you want to talk to them for an hour and they just will shut down because no one wants to do that. So I tell them 15 minutes. And what happens is if they have a lot to say and it runs over that, they usually don't have a problem with it. And I'm very casual. I've interviewed, I've done so much like writing in 20 years, and I did a lot of content writing, which means I did articles, magazine articles. I interviewed hundreds of people. So I have a good ability to know how to talk to someone. If people are very curt, if they give one-word answers and I can't go any farther, there's going to be a short interview. But I usually say, it's a 15 minutes. It would help us out a lot. And you know what? The people I've worked with, when they give me the names of their customers, a lot of times those people reach out to me and say, I am more than happy to talk to you about so-and-so because I just love them. That's the ideal situation. So yeah, it's just tell them it's going to be short. Tell them they're not going to, I tell them, listen, you're not going to be quoted, because they're not unless they want to be. I'm not going to quote you. I want to get an idea of whatever it is I need to find out.
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree with you on that. Having done some of these customer interviews myself, I top it up by 5 minutes. So I'm like, I usually say like 20 minutes of your time, right? And 9 times out of 10, Linda, I'm not even kidding. They go for about 30 to 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Because people just have a lot to say. Like, when you start making it about them instead of about the company, right? Like,
yeah, like, how did this help you? And they start talking about it. Oh, sure.
Absolutely. All right. We get to the point in the conversation where we're talking about actionable tips, right? So let's appreciate this for a second. We all know that Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. And, some of this stuff you can't do in an hour or in 24 hours and so forth. But if somebody who is out there struggling with copywriting, helping to define the value proposition of their company, what are 3 to 5 things that you would tell them you can do right now?
Number one thing is study your competition. And that's going to take, you can do a brief, even just a brief research. You don't have to dive into it super deep unless you want to. I do, because that's what I do. But you want to look at, like there's a site, answerthepublic.com. You familiar with that? So you find out what people are asking about that product or service. What are they looking up? That's the first thing I would do. The second is there's 5 traits of value proposition that you want to have. And so when I actually have like a scorecard, and I rate a value prop on these 5 traits. So it should be unique. It should be desirable, something that your customer says they want, specific, succinct, so keep it short. And lastly, you want it to be memorable, something people will remember. And so it has to be, it could be stronger on one part than the other, but look for something that stands out and it doesn't sound like everyone else. And how do you do it? There's always something. You know, I work with a lot of health and fitness companies that on the surface seems like, oh, they do what everybody else does. But when you get into it, there's always something unique that they're doing. And so those are the things, like look for, where's that gap? So it's study your competition, look for the gap, look for these 5 traits: unique, desirable, specific, succinct, and memorable. So that's 3 things. Well, is that enough to get started?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I got to backtrack a little bit, and this is my bad. Like, it might also help or be useful for the listeners out there if we can just dissect it a little bit, right? Because there is a process, and you've mentioned it already, to developing a value proposition. But can you elaborate a little bit more on what that actually consists of? Like, what's in the value proposition?
It should say, going back to my own. So the reason that I chose, so I said boost your fitness and health brand.
Yeah.
The reason I said that to start is that I have a fitness background and I've written for a lot of health companies, and brand indicates it's B2B because I do B2B. And then I said with expert crafted magazine quality copy, because I spent 15, 20 years working for and writing for glossy magazines, they call them, like the real, you know, I've been in Time Magazine and Huffington Post and a lot of these other ones. And so it combines what makes me unique as well as who my target audience is and what I'm doing. So boost your brand. That's what I do. Health and fitness brand, that's specific to the audience. Magazine quality copy shows how that's what my magazine writing background. So if you can combine those things, a lot of it too is also about testing. So you want to run these things by, like you could even, there's a number of sites, and I can't name them offhand. There was usertesting.com, I think is one. It used to be $50 a person to try, but I think it's more than that now. It can be pricey to test this, but even just run it by your, you know, colleagues or people who are potential customers.
Yeah.
Do a poll on LinkedIn, you know, and these are 3 things, you know, what do you think is best? So they come about, like the value props usually come about partly from the research from interviews with my customers. What are they saying? What are the terms that keep popping up? What's being said on social media is also important because it's unfiltered, especially a site like Reddit, where I get some really good stuff because people just don't care. They'll just say anything.
Oh yeah, there's no filter there.
So Reddit, I know I posted things and made a mistake. They will just blast you.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's a combination of what you hear kind of on the streets, what your customers are telling you, and then what you want to be, you know, as far as unique versus your competitors. And it takes a while. I mean, I allow 4 weeks of research to pull together a really good value prop. I mean, I could probably do it a little bit quicker than that, but to get a hold of everything and really look at what's important, it's not something that's easy to do. People just throw these things out there, you know.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because I tend to see that a lot, even in, you know, with my customers and whatnot. Like a lot of them are under this illusion that, well, it's a value proposition. It can't be that hard, or it can't take that long, right? But then the reason they think that way is because, you know, nobody's ever like you know, popped the trunk, lifted the hood, or whatever analogy you want to use, right? So they don't actually know what's happening behind the scenes, right? Like how much work actually goes into that, right?
Yeah. It's not something you can just toss together. But if you do, I mean, you're going to end up sounding like everybody else. Like even using AI.
Case in point.
Yeah, I mean, I will use AI to brainstorm. I never use, like for something like this, I did go in there and say, hey, this is everything I do. What do you think would be a good value prop? But you have to keep in mind that AI is going to pull together what's out there already. So it's not going to be unique. It's going to be, okay, this is what other people are saying. So, but it gives me an idea of how, like when it said fitness and health brand, I like that because it said if you're B2B, you want to include brands. So yeah, I did use AI to brainstorm a little bit, but the end result was my own. And that's the way I use AI, is to help it along, but it's not the end result.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And we will get to the topic of AI in a second. But before we do, if you could just give us an example of how you helped the customer to develop and define the value proposition that they had or they didn't have.
I was working with an Australian company that it's a recovery company. So it's for sports. It was owned. Well, it is owned. It's still there. It's owned by a former professional athlete. And so it's not a gym. It's more of a recovery recovery place. So you go in and you do ice baths, massages, like things to recover from your
physical therapy.
Yeah, it's like that, but it's even beyond that.
Okay.
So I talked to him and I spoke to his I'm trying to think if it was customers. This is a while ago, so I'm trying to think of customers. He started a franchise of these. So this is the B2B where it comes in. So B2C would be the people, the end user, but he actually was selling the franchises to people who had the same goals as he did, which is to help people recover from sports injuries or just to up their game. And so when I talked to him and the people that were potential customers, they talked about how they were driven by a greater purpose. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about how much am I going to make, running this franchise? How much can I charge? Like that never came up. And so it was always like after talking to him, and literally that's the thing that got him out of bed in the morning. He and his wife were running this franchise. And so I incorporated that into the header, and that's what made it. I mean, I remember because what happens is when I do a value proposition, I create this whole presentation. And so when I was presenting it, he was silent, and that's either really good or really bad. In this case, it was really good. He just said, "I don't even know what to say. This is so good," is what he said. And the franchise, the header on his website was for entrepreneurs driven by a greater purpose. That was it. That was it. It wasn't the money. It wasn't, hey, even helping people was, it was secondary. It was part of it, but it really was about that inner drive to seek to have a greater purpose. And this was what they felt their purpose was. That was probably the biggest one as far as a revelation. Like he didn't even expect that.
Yeah. No, fantastic. I mean, that must have been nerve-wracking for you. I think we've all been in those meetings where, the customer doesn't say anything. And like you said, it's like, okay, he either really loves this or he really hates it. And he's just waiting until you're done. And then he delivers the grand finale.
And I don't give them anything ahead of time because it's, we talk back and forth during the process, but when I present everything, I don't send them everything until it's completely done. Cause sometimes I'll edit it live if there's something, but it's nerve wracking. And, I'm pretty good at ad-libbing here and there and not getting nervous or not showing that I'm nervous, but sometimes inside I'm sweating. So
I hear you. I've tried to train myself to do this, and I haven't been very successful at it. But I've tried to train myself to avoid using gap fillers.
Yeah.
When I'm nervous in a presentation, they say just exercise or practice using silence instead.
Yeah.
Because apparently silence can be very powerful, but I've found also that silence can also be to your detriment as well, right?
Yeah. Right. Sometimes. I know. I used to, years ago, I was a part of Toastmasters where they teach you how to speak. And there's somebody, did you ever go to one of those meetings?
Yes.
And they have somebody counting your ums and ahs, and that's what got me out of it. I usually can catch myself, but it makes you really, really aware of it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And now we are going back to the topic on everyone's lips these days, AI. All right. Now, don't get me wrong. We're not going to start talking about how the machines are rising up and replacing all the copywriters, because I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But I think the more important question, which I'm passing on to you, Linda, is AI seems to be impacting almost every aspect of our work, not just as marketers and copywriters, but pretty much across other industries. But do you think that AI should be used in copywriting? And if yes, how?
I think it should be. There's definitely a role. There's a place for it. What I have found is I like to brainstorm with it, but it tends to come up, and I have the Chat GPT, this next level. There's like, I pay $20 a month for it, which is supposed to be, my copywriting coach said, get this one because it's better. It comes up with the same phrases a lot. And it loves words like dive into, and I can't think of it's like marketing speak is what I call it. So I think that it's great to get a start. Like a lot of times I will take an entire interview, even like my podcast, I'll put everything, the notes or a bulk of it into AI and say, can you extract what the main points are? And that will speed up things for me. It really worked well when I had a client that she said she had 5 different target audience personas. And when I looked at this Excel spreadsheet she sent me, I'm like, how am I going to go through all this? And I said, you know what? I'm throwing all this in AI. And I said, can you merge these into one? Like, what are the commonalities? That was probably the eye opener for me because it came up with what was the same in all 5. So it saved me a ton of time. I think that's the way to use it, really, is it can save you time for extracting important information. It can get you started with titles and headings. I don't rely on it a lot for that because, as I said, it uses a lot of marketing speak. It's the same stuff everyone says. And that's what this whole interview is about, is not sounding like everybody else. And even AI, at one point, I had asked something about that kind of, as I put it, I made it punch itself in the face. I said, what is it that humans do better than AI? And it said, you have to remember that AI does not create, it repeats, and it gets information that's already out there where it doesn't, it can speed up research, but it's not to me, it should never be the final word. You've got to be a copywriter and you've got to know how to create good copy and use it as a tool. It definitely has a place, and it has sped up processes for me, for sure.
At the very least, it'll help you to filter out all the terrible ideas. When you prompt Chat GPT to come up with headlines, and it comes up with all these like cringe-worthy ones.
Oh, I know. And it always uses colons. It's like it has one part colon, and so you can put in it, please change these to titles without colons. Mm-hmm. It still sometimes will still do it. It's very uncooperative at times.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
I started the uprising. I'm using colons.
It's like these little like these microaggressions, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, like, look, I'm not against AI. A potential client asked me this last week. How does the availability of all these AI tools impact the kind of like writing work that I do? And I said, like, look, there's a time and place for AI. I just don't think that it should be used. And I think this was your point. Like the way that people are always chasing the next hack or looking for that shortcut. I don't think that it should be to shortcut your work. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't mean that you can save time researching. I think that's great, but I don't think that you should rely on AI to do all the copy for you.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and I think that's where it goes all right.
And you can tell. Yes. You can tell when someone's used it. Even in LinkedIn, I'm on there a lot, and you can tell because if their comment is a summation of what you said, that's AI.
Oh, yeah.
Like 9 out of 10 times.
Absolutely.
They're not adding anything. They're just repeating. And it's like, just stop.
Tell us how you feel. Right. Like,
right. Well, it's interesting. I recently heard an interview with somebody who had met, it was one of the actors in Jurassic Park had met who is it? I can't think of his name. The writer of Jurassic Park.
Michael Crichton.
Yeah. So he had a conversation with Michael Crichton, and he asked him about somehow it wasn't even AI specifically, but it was the internet. And he said, what is it, how do you feel about everything that's happening? And Michael Crichton said, I hate it. And the actor said, well, why? He says, because people aren't thinking for themselves. He said Einstein came up with his ideas by sitting and looking out into like whatever he looked out into. It was, he would sit and think. And he said that AI and our reliance on the internet is kind of what did he call it? But it meant like it's just everybody else's ideas put into one. Like you don't have your own idea. He said you need to sit by yourself and think of things, originate ideas on your own without relying on everybody else's input. And I thought that was great. It was such a good point to make.
Absolutely. Absolutely. More people should be following that advice today, I would say. It's even more pertinent than it was like a decade ago. Right?
Yeah. It's easy to just rely on AI.
Absolutely. Linda, it kind of sounds like you've been on your soapbox all this while, but I'm going to ask you to stay up there a little bit longer, just for a couple of minutes, just for this next question. So here it goes. A status quo in your area of expertise that you passionately disagree with and why. And let's make it relevant to value proposition.
Value proposition. Okay, that's something else lined up for that. For a value proposition, I think, and I don't know if it's something people do all the time, but it's really either not thinking they need one. I think that's probably the biggest thing is, we don't need a value proposition. People know what we do, or we're just going to keep talking about what we do. And it's just your value proposition is the foundation for all of your messaging. Once you have that down, and that's why I do that first with my clients, we need to find your value prop because all the copy needs to come back to that. So not taking it seriously enough, not spending enough time creating it. These are the things, just really not seeing that it's that important. And that's one reason why I chose this as sort of my area of expertise, because I'm really good at distilling down a lot of information and summing it up into one statement. So I think it's just feeling like you don't need one or that it's not that important, and you'd be wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, at least in my experience, because I'm more of like the branding guy for B2B. And it tends to be that way with a lot of B2B companies. They don't feel that brand is important until it actually becomes a serious problem.
Right.
In terms of the lack of differentiation. I mean, to your point earlier in the conversation, right? So
I was just saying that people, if you don't create your brand, and I think it also pertains to your value proposition, people will create it for you.
Yep.
And you don't want that.
I've heard that one. Okay, yeah. Linda, here comes the bonus question. And
okay,
let's see if it has something to do with your actual area of expertise or it's just something for you personally. Okay, here we go. If you were given the opportunity to interview someone one-on-one, living or dead, who would it be and why?
The first name that popped into my mind is Keanu Reeves.
Okay.
Because I love him he seems to have escaped all the Hollywood BS and maintained his humanness. I want to know how he did that. I could also say that about Tom Hanks, but I've heard some negative things about Tom Hanks. Keanu Reeves, also because Keanu is half Asian like you and I are.
Yes. Yes.
so I just I'm fascinated whenever I read things about him where he doesn't talk about things like how he gives away money, he supports things. He doesn't look for the accolades. He doesn't do it for the publicity. And he gives up his seats on a bus for people. I mean, I'm fascinated by that. So probably him. And he just seems like he would be so cool to sit down and talk to.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. To your point, it's he's managed, and kudos to him because it's not easy. He's managed to avoid all these, this Hollywood intrigue and scandal that other celebrities of his caliber are plagued with. And, some of them can't seem to get away from the scandals, right?
Right. And the other question I would have for him is, how does he do a movie like John Wick? Which, have you seen any of the John Wick movies? So they're violent. I mean, they're violent to the point of almost being comical. They're like insanely ridiculous.
Yeah.
But how does he do that at the same time that he seems to be such a, I don't know if he's spiritual. He comes across like that.
He does. Yeah, he does.
And it's interesting.
I could be wrong, but there was a movie, I think it was the early 90s, and it was Bernardo Bertolucci was the director. It was Little Buddha, I think.
Okay, I haven't heard of it.
He was in that one.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So he actually did play Prince Siddhartha, who eventually became the Buddha, right? So.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. He just seems like somebody. I also feel like he's somebody who you can sit down and talk to without feeling intimidated. Like there's other actors that you would be kind of, you'd be nervous for. I just don't think I'd be nervous. I just think he's just a regular guy. How does he do it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all part of the magic. But
yeah,
Linda, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for sharing your expertise and experience with the listeners. So please, quick intro to yourself and how people out there can get in touch with you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, Christian. It's been a lot of fun. Well, obviously I'm on LinkedIn a lot. The copyworks, WRX.com is my website. And you can reach me there or DM me on LinkedIn. And if there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy. And I also have my podcast, of course, which is the B2B marketing and copywriting podcast.
Fantastic. Linda, once again, thank you so much for your time. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.